Hello and welcome. This is a pre-algebra video discussing perfect squares and square roots. This is on page 8 of your quarter 1 pre-algebra notebook. So what are perfect squares? Perfect squares is a number that can be expressed as the product of two equal integers. And if you remember, product means to multiply. Two equal integers, so the same number. So some examples. 5 squared expanded is 5 times 5, and that equals 25. 25 is a perfect square. Another way to think about perfect squares is as squares. So if I think about a square that has the side lengths of 8 and 8, and we'll make this a square by labeling it and giving it some right angles. We know a square has 4 equal sides and 4 right angles. I know the area is going to be the side times the side, or side squared. You might have also thought of it as length times width. I know my 5s look like my S's, sorry. So in this case, I know the area is going to be 8 times 8, and that's 64, and we'll call these inches squared. So that 64 is a perfect square. So I think a great way to think about perfect squares is perfect squares represent the area of a square. It's always nice to have that visual of what a perfect square is. Now, if I want to determine if a number is a perfect square, the easiest way to do that is to use the inverse operation, and that is called the square root. That is the inverse of perfect squares. If it is a whole number or terminating decimal, it's a perfect square. I just want to give an example of a terminating decimal that would result in a perfect square. For instance, if I have a number like this, 25 hundredths, you can see from here that 25 becomes a perfect square. Well, 25 hundredths is also a perfect square. If I take the square root, and that's the sign for square rooting, that's called a radical. If I take the square root of 25 hundredths and I put that into my calculator, I will actually get 0.5. And that means, because it's a terminating decimal, it ends, I have a perfect square. So 0.25 is a perfect square. Perfect square. So let's determine if the following numbers are perfect squares, and we're just going to write a yes or no. Again, the best way to do this is take to the square root. So if I take the square root of 80 in my calculator, I'm going to note in my calculator that I'll get about 8.9, about. So I'll put a little wavy equal sign because that means about. 8.9 is not a whole number. So that is a no. There was a lot of repeating after that 9. If I look at 121 and I take the square root of 121, you get 11. 11 is a nice, perfect whole number. If I take the square root of 784, I'm putting these in my calculator, the answer is 28. So it does look like 784 is a perfect square. And finally, I'll take the square root of 55, and I'm going to get about 7.4. It goes repeating for a while, so that is a no for 55. Let's keep on going. We're going to evaluate each square root if possible. Round any non-perfect squares to the nearest hundredth. So, the square root of 9, what number multiplied by itself equals 9? I can put that in the calculator, but that's what I'm looking for. What number multiplied by itself will equal 9? I know that 3 times 3 equals 9, so the square root of 9 is 3. Now here I've got this negative sign on the outside, so I'm looking for the opposite of the square root of 169. So what number multiplied by itself equals 169? Well, actually 13 times 13 equals 169. I want the opposite, so this is going to be negative 13. This symbol is called plus or minus. That means that the answer can be positive or the answer can be negative. So plus or minus the square root of 225. Well, what number multiplied by itself will equal 225? You can put that in the calculator, or you might know that 15 times 15, so plus or minus 15. This one is tricky. I know that 17 times 17 equals 289, but there's a negative sign in there, and that is impossible because think about it. I know that 17 times 17 equals 289. That's a positive times a positive equaling positive. Well, this is negative 289. And remember, it has to be the same number. If I look at negative 17, let's just do negative 17, right? We'll try to get that negative that way. That also equals a positive 289. The only way I can use opposites to get negative 289, but I can't use the same number. So this is what we would call undefined or not possible. Eventually, you will be able to do something with this number, but not for a number of years. Alrighty, if I put the square root of 26, well, I know that's not going to be a perfect square because I know 5 times 5 is 25, and that's so close to 26, I'm not thinking I'm going to find a perfect square number. So I put this in the calculator, and I get about 5.10 because I'm rounding to the nearest hundredth. That's 2 numbers after. This is the opposite of the square root of 84, and I put that in the calculator. I'm going to put the negative because this negative is on the outside, and it's about 9.17. The square root of 52 is about, I'm putting these in the calculator, 7 21 hundredths. And the square root of 904 is about 30 7 hundredths. So we're going to move on to page 9, and we're going to look at question number 13. And this is a really popular question, and it is find a number whose square root is between 8 and 9. So I'm looking for a number that will get a square root between 8 and 9. So if I think about how to take a square root, I'm starting with a perfect square. I'm starting with the area of a square. So let's think about my squares. I know that I have 1 times 1 is 1. 2 times 2 is 4. 3 times 3 is 9. 4 times 4 is 16. 5 times 5 is 25. 6 times 6 is 36. 7 times 7 is 49. 8 times 8 is 64. Okay, 8 times 8 is going to give me 64. 9 times 9 is 81. Okay, so 9 times 9 equals 81. So I know, because 8 times 8 equals 64, the square root of 64 equals 8. And because 9 times 9 equals 81, the square root of 81 equals 9. So there are more than one possible numbers. I can take the square root of any number between 64 and 81. So if I take the square root of any number between 64 and 81, the answer will be between 8 and 9. So lots of different answers: 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, 80, and then you're done. Alrighty, last pieces. Find two consecutive whole numbers between which each square root lies. Remember that the word consecutive means one right after the next. So 2 and 3 are consecutive because 3 comes right after 2. So let's look at the square root of 96. I'm going to just keep on going here a little. 10 times 10 equals 100 because I think this is what really helps figure out these problems. I'm going to go a little bit. Equals 169, 14 times, and you learn these with time. You can always use your calculator and write them down, but it's great to just start here. So I've got 96, right? Well, let's look here. Where does 96 fall between? It falls between here, right? 9 times 9 equals 81. So the square root of 81 equals 9. 10 times 10 equals 100. So the square root of 100 equals 10. I can see that 96 will be in between 81 and 100. So the two consecutive numbers are 9 and 10. Let's look at 21. Let's look at 21 and look at my perfect squares, and I can see here's 16, here's 25. So 4 times 4 equals 16, so the square root of 16 equals 4. 5 times 5 equals 25, so the square root of 25 equals 5. This is going to fit right in between there. So I am going to have my consecutive numbers of 4 and 5. Now on this last one, you can see we stopped our square roots at 225. And even if I go up to like 20 times 20, that's 400. So 510 is a bit above what we would normally know off the top of our head. So I'm going to take a calculator. You're not going to have a graphing calculator like this, but we'll use this because this is what I have at home. And you can see I've put in the square root button of 510. And what I see from my calculator is that it is about 22.58. I'm just rounding it to the nearest hundredth here. You can see the 3, 5, and 4 and below. Let it go. So what two numbers is the square root of 510? What two consecutive numbers? I'm going to look at 22. I know that my first number is 22. 0.58 is a little bit bigger, so this is going to be 22, and my next consecutive number is 23. And that's how you can use a calculator to find those consecutive numbers. That is all for this video. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.